in a compelling discussion. They will delve into the intricate details, focusing on identity and politics. Let me brief you quickly about our authors and our guests. Dilip Sinha is a writer and former diplomat. He joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1978. He was India's ambassador to the United States in Geneva and earlier to Greece. He served in India's mission in Islamabad, Dhaka, Cairo, Bonn, and Brasilia, and was the head of the United Nations and the Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran divisions in the Ministry of External Affairs. He also worked in the Prime Minister's office during the term of Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Raoji. He was also the chairman of the Manipur Public Service Commission. He has authored two books. First one being Legitimacy of Power, the Permanence of Five in the Security Council, published by the Indian Council of World Affairs, and second being Imperial Games in Tibet, the Struggle for Statehood and Sovereignty, published by Pan Macmillan. Sir, it's a pleasure for us to have you here. जोरदार तालियों से उनका अभिवादन करेंगे हम. Next, we have Lieutenant General P.R. Shankar ji. He retired as the Director General of the Artillery in the Indian Army. He is presently a professor in the Aerospace Department of IIT Madras. He is also a distinguished fellow of CLAWS and a member of Chennai Center of China Studies. He has also been a director of the L&T Defense Board when it existed. He has his own YouTube channel with the name Gunner's Shot. I'm surely going to subscribe to that. I like the name. Gunner Shot. He takes keen interest in defense technology, national strategic and China affairs. He is also involved in applied research on cutting edge technologies. So it's a pleasure for us to have you. Please welcome him with a round of applause. Last but not the least, we are extremely delighted to have Ambassador Anil Wadhwa with us. He was a member of the Indian Foreign Service from 1979 to 2017 and has served as the Indian ambassador to Italy, Thailand, Oman, and Poland. As secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs of India, he oversaw relations with Southeast Asia, Gulf, and West Asia, Pacific, and Australia. He has also served as India's chief delegate to the East Asia Summit, the Arab League, Mekong Ganga Cooperation, and ARF meetings, and more. He has also led a CII task force for writing the Australia Economic Strategy Report for the Indian government. Ambassador Wadhwaji is currently a distinguished fellow with the Vivekanand International Foundation, New Delhi. It's a pleasure for us to have three gentlemen amongst us, and I would request them to please begin the conversation, and we must grace them with a round of applause, everybody.
Thank you very much. What a wonderful session we had just before this, and the last song that we all heard, Dur Hato Dunya Walo, I think is very apt for this session because we're talking about Tibet. And when Dilip explains about his book first, and what I'm going to do is to ask both Dilip Sinha and General Shankar to talk about Tibet as an opening uh, remarks for about 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes each, so that you have a clarity about what the book is about. And also, General Shankar is going to talk about with some slides about where the situational yeah, about bringing about situational awareness for all of you, and then we'll get into some questions, and thereafter open the questions to the floor. Quickly introducing the subject. First of all, in 1947, the government of India inherited the treaties of the British Raj with regard to Tibet, which was at that time referred to as a de facto country as opposed to an independent country. In 1950, China annexed Tibet, and the 1954 trade agreement that was entered into between India and China ended India's centuries-old trade with Tibet. And in 1952, the Indian mission there in Tibet was downgraded to a consulate, and it was closed after the 1962 war. The 14th Dalai Lama, whom we all know, escaped from Tibet to India in March 1959 following a failed uprising there. And then the Central Tibet administration has been there in exile in India since then. In June 2020, 2003, during Mr. Vajpayee's visit, the Tibet Autonomous Region was recognized as part of China. And in return, the Chinese acknowledged Sikkim as part of India. Now, the calls for Tibetan self determination have been made in the UN over the years. The Chinese remain very sensitive, and the Dalai Lama, whenever he visits other countries, there's a strong protest from the Chinese. The US has recently passed a Restore Tibet Act as late as 2024, which is focused once again on Tibet and on the Tibet question. For India, the major issue is that when the current Dalai Lama, who's pretty old now, passes away, then that will raise a lot of questions with regard to succession, and there will be a number of players who will come into play. So, for that and more, we will be asking questions from our two panelists. First of all, Dilip, very quickly, let me ask you to introduce the book.
Thank you, Anil. First of all, let me congratulate the BLF for selecting this topic and for positing Tibet where it should be, right in front of India and China, because that is one of the key factors in relations between India and China. Uh, Coming to my book, this book was the outcome of a number of questions rankling in my mind about Tibet. And one of the first questions that kept rankling in my mind was, why is it that Tibet, China's claim to Tibet has been accepted so unquestioningly by the world? Now, there are a number of countries that are claimed by other countries. There are a number of disputes in the world. A number of wars have been fought, but Tibet is not considered either a dispute or a country under foreign occupation. The whole world simply accepts that Tibet is a part of China. The question was, why is that so? And this got me into reading about the politics of the imperial powers in Central Asia. There were essentially two main powers that we are familiar with, Britain and Russia. These were two empires trying to expand into Central Asia, and we are all familiar with the Great Game. What we generally tend to forget is that there was a third imperial power in this game also. This was China. Now, in the 19th century, China had become a relatively weak power, but it was still a power. And China had already occupied countries like Mongolia, East Turkestan, and Tibet in the 18th century. So it was the interactions between Britain and Russia that led to the formation of different countries which were assigned to different empires. And that was the final settlement that sealed the fate of Tibet, to the extent that in November 1950, when Tibet was attacked by China and Tibet appealed to the United Nations, in the United Nations, Britain and Russia took the same stand that Tibet was a part of China and therefore the UN had no role to play in it. Now, the Cold War had started by this time. The East and West were fighting a war in Korea, but on Tibet, the East and the West had one position, which is that the UN has no role to play in Tibet. So this is the main theme of my book. When I come across to India's policy, how did we formulate our policy? Uh, were there any disputes, any differences of opinion within India on our Tibet policy? And what was our Tibet policy based upon? So that forms the second part of the book. And then, of course, one comes to the fact, why is Tibet important for India? Is it a lost cause? If you talk to people, they say it's a lost cause, it's gone forever. But the fact is that for India, Tibet is an extremely important country. Historically, Tibet was our largest neighbor. Our longest border has been historically with Tibet. Today, it is with Bangladesh. And the Tibetan border or frontier, as it used to be called in those days, was by far the most peaceful frontier we have had in our long history when we had all kinds of invasions. The only people who crossed the frontiers were pilgrims, monks, traders, scholars, and one never stationed any troops over there. Uh, the terrain, of course, was extremely harsh. This was a land of the gods. The people worshipped the gods, the mountains were worshipped, and religion was at the heart of everybody, and all religions were respected. The fact that Kailash Parvat and Mansaro are there, and they are respected by three major religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, and the Bon religion, shows the kind of reverence the people had for nature over there and for the gods. And when we come to the point of uh, the importance of Tibet in India-China relations. Now, whenever India and China talk, we don't talk about Tibet at all. But at the back of everybody's mind is Tibet, because China suspects that India is supporting the Tibetan struggle for freedom. Whether we are or not is a different matter, but China suspects that. One of the last talks that took place before the Chinese invasion of India was in 1961, I think, when an Indian delegation had gone to Beijing, and the Indian ambassador there had said, uh, to the Chinese, I'm glad that the Tibet issue is now over. But this was 2 years after the Dalai Lama had fled to India. And the Chinese uh, leader of the delegation said, no, you are mistaken. Tibet is is one of the reasons why we have differences. So that suspicion that China has with India is, is a factor. And the other factor is that China claims a lot of territory that belongs to India today, that is under Indian administration, is part of India, whether it is Arunachal or other parts of the Himalayas. Claim that China makes on these areas is entirely based upon its claim to Tibet. It is because these regions had close relations with Tibet that China claims that these are a part of China today. So Tibet is at the heart of the territorial dispute as well. So this is the factor. Now, I'll come now to the last point. That is, and I'd like to show the slides here. Uh, China's claim to Tibet. Now, what is China's claim to Tibet based on, and why does the world accept this? Uh, this photograph is a very interesting photograph. It was taken in 1912 when Chinese troops were asked to leave Tibet. Now, remember in 1912, the Qing dynasty in China, the Manchu dynasty, had collapsed, and the Chinese army that was located in Lhasa was disarmed, and they were told to go back to China. This photograph was taken. They went back not through China because the borders were very disturbed. They went back through India, and the British gave them permission. The next slide. This was the Declaration of Independence made by the 13th Dalai Lama, the predecessor of the current Dalai Lama, in 1913. The 13th Dalai Lama had fled to India when the Chinese had invaded Lhasa in 1910. There were a number of invasions after the Qing rule, Qing dynasty, but this was in 1910 when Chao Er-Feng had invaded Lhasa. The 13th Dalai Lama had fled to India, and he went back 3 years later and declared independence. The next slide. This is a photograph taken in 1958 when our first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru went to Bhutan. The road to Bhutan was through Chumbi Valley because that's the most convenient route. So he went to Sikkim, from Sikkim crossed over to Yatung in the Chumbi Valley. Chumbi Valley is the valley between Sikkim and Bhutan, is the narrow peninsula kind of a thing that juts between, it's a part of Tibet, between Sikkim and Bhutan. So he spent the night there and then went across to Bhutan. You look at the number of Indians over there, all wearing Gandhi topis. That was a kind of Indian population that was there in Yatung at that time. They were traders who used to trade. And all that is, of course, now over. There's one more photograph, that the next slide, which gives you an idea of the terrain. Now, incidentally, India and Tibet are two countries that are very easy to identify on any map because they are geographically evident. You can see the plateau north of India. Now, we all know that scholars came to India, to Nalanda, to study Sanskrit, to study Buddhism, Pali, etc., both from Tibet and from China. None of the scholars from China came through Tibet. They all came through either Central Asia and Afghanistan or came by sea. None came through Tibet, despite the fact that Tibet had its own flow of scholars into India. So that shows that certainly till in that period when China claims that Tibet was a part of China, neither Huensang nor Fashian nor Yiqing thought of coming to India to Tibet, which shows that in their psyche, Tibet was not considered part of their country. So I'll stop here and move on to the other points in the course of questions. Thank you.
May I? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity. At the outset, I must recommend this book to all of you. I was fortunate, the ambassador had given me this book and I read it, and I found it a treasure trove of information, historical information and fact about Tibet. Can I have the slides? But what I'm going to do now is fast forward to what it is today. Yeah, no, not this. Next. No, no, my slides which I had, India, China, Tibet, which I gave you. Not this. I gave you a presentation. Yeah, this is his slides. Take it off. And yeah, fundamentally, what I'm going to speak of. Yeah, this is the one. Okay. Next slide. We don't talk of this. Look, in any argument, 90% of the argument is position. And that position today is with China. So you're going to, any argument hereafter to retake Tibet or otherwise is against the grain of this fundamental thing. Next. Okay, what are the interests? We need to understand everyone's interest in this whole game. What are India's interests? Tibet to be a buffer with China after having retaken back the Aksai Chin and other pockets which they've occupied. What is Tibet's interest in this whole game? Is it independence or autonomy? We don't know. One is not clear about it. Is it peaceful resolution as per His Holiness Dalai Lama's middle path, which is laid out? It vague. But China has a lot of interests. And I'll go over them one by one because understanding this is critical to how you're going to go forward. Given the fact that we've recognized Tibet as part of China, as the ambassador had said in 2003. Okay, next. Next. Next slide, please. Okay, look at this. This is Xinjiang and this is Tibet. Go further. You see the next click. Yeah, you see these are the roots. These are the Pamir Knot and all the mountain ranges coming out. Fundamentally, you have to understand that China needs Tibet and Xinjiang both together. Next, click next. You see that Aksai Chin? That's very critical. You can't go to Xinjiang other than through Tibet, and you can't go to Tibet other than through Xinjiang. Otherwise, both are separated provinces and they can't be controlled. They are at the fringes of China. Next. That is why that route is important. That route, which goes from Tibet into Kashgar to Hotan, which they built, and that's the Aksai Chin. That is their fundamental interest, and they'll never give it up. If they have to give it up, you have to do something special about it. Next. Okay. Now, what are the other points of interest? They will threaten the chicken snake, Chimbu Valley. They've tried it, Doklam. And then, of course, they claim Tawang because the sixth Dalai Lama was born in Tawang. Like what the ambassador said. The claim to all these places is based on their claim on Tibet or their right on Tibet today. Because Tawang, the sixth Dalai Lama was born there and he's part of the Tibetan Buddhism. So Tawang is considered as part of Tibet. As an extension of Tawang, the rest of Arunachal also has come into play. I must clarify here. Till 2003, there was no talk of something called South Tibet. You will find this word South Tibet nowhere. It's only after we recognized, Tibet as part of China in 2003, then they started thereafter part of their salami slicing and legal warfare that Tibet South Tibet as they call it Zangan. Okay, next. Then, of course, Tibet is the water tower of Asia. But more importantly, this is a Chinese map. Huh? All the important rivers of China flow from Tibet. If someone occupies Tibet, you can choke China, either the Yangtze or the Honghe, the Yellow River or the Sorrow of China, as they say. Right? And now, next. Okay, Tibet is critical for minerals all through. But now they got a hoard of copper. They're not going to give it up. Next. Okay. And this is critical for this new dam which they are putting at the Big Bend. It's critical for their energy. You know, someone spoke in the morning of AI, this, that, and all. For AI, you need energy. Forget about DeepSeek and what it has happened. Even looking beyond, you need energy. Why do you think Donald Trump is asking for Greenland? Why do you think he wants to go to Mars? This is for the energy of the next century. This is it. If anyone wants to be a superpower, energy superpower, or you want to be an AI superpower, you need energy. And this dam is big energy for Tibet. Okay, next. Okay. And of course, they've already started their story. They have already started this narrative that who's going to be the next Dalai Lama. Unfortunately, we have not had. Okay, next. Okay. And Xi Jinping has started visiting Tibetan places of interest. They've already started a narrative. The lawfare is already on. The religious lawfare is already on. We don't see that on our own part. Next. Okay. Recently, in the earthquake which happened, at Shigatse, a lot of people died, but everything was banned. The truth shouldn't come out. All this is happening. China is playing a very organized game. Yeah, next. Sorry. Right? And they've already started sanctioning people who are questioning this claim of China on Tibet. So they're playing a very organized game. So in this kind of a situation, what is our stance and how do we go forward is the big question. Thanks for the slides. All yours, sir.
Thank you very much. So now we have the situational awareness as well. I wanted to ask a few questions, if I may, to both of you in turn. And the first question, Dilip, I'd like to ask you is about a chapter in your book, in fact, two chapters, in which you refer to the role of K.M. Panikkar, because he was Indian ambassador to China. And in fact, you say in chapter 9 of the book, if I remember correctly, that he was fascinated by the Chinese Communist Party, and he also said that he even informed Nehru that China would not attack Tibet, which they did in 1950. And the next chapter, which is entitled China Conquers Tibet, um, you said that Panikkar also came up with a very ingenious explanation of China's invasion of Tibet. Now, could you elaborate a little bit more on his role? And would the course of history have been different if he was not enamored, as you say, by the Chinese Communist Party?
Thanks. This is a question that is almost impossible to answer because while it is uh, likely that things may have been different, while it is possible, I don't think it's likely. Panikkar, incidentally, was appointed as ambassador to nationalist China, to Chiang Kai shek's government. He went first to Nanjing. And when Chiang Kai shek fled to Taiwan in December 1949, he he was transferred his loyalty to, not loyalty, well, accreditation to the Communist Party government, which had taken over in September 1949 in in Beijing. And he advised that India could recognize the new regime, which India did. India was one of the first non-communist countries. Britain, UK, and India were among the first countries to recognize the new regime. Now, Panikkar, of course, was an extremely erudite person. He was a very knowledgeable historian, but so was our first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. So while Panikkar may have influenced Nehru's thinking, he certainly, his early reports that you see on the Communist Party are very favorable to the new regime. He completely ignored the violence that the Communist Party was perpetrating on the nationalists and the others in China, and gave very painted a very favorable picture to the regime, to the government in India. But Nehru himself was also quite well disposed towards the communists. He regarded the theocracy in Tibet as obscurantist and as static, and regarded the communist ideology as progressive. So there was already a sympathy in the minds of Nehru, which was favorable to the communist regime in China. So it is unlikely that Nehru would have gone against it. What was surprising to me was that it was the Ministry of External Affairs, the Secretary General Shankar Bajpai, and the Foreign Secretary KPS Menon, who were very annoyed with Panikkar for at times not conveying to the Chinese government the uh, frustration and the reservation that India had about the Chinese invasion of Tibet. And in fact, at one point, they even compared him to the Norwegian person who had gone over to the Quisling. Uh, that he was that person, that he was behaving like him. So I was surprised to find that the External Affairs Ministry at that time was very annoyed with Panikkar, but eventually his view prevailed. And whether it prevailed because of his or because of Nehru's own convictions is a matter of conjecture.
Thank you. General Shankar, again on in a chapter on China reconquers Tibet, which is chapter 10 in the book. Since you've read the book, there is a report by the Times, the British newspaper there, which said that as early as 1952, we had Soviet engineers who were helping China build a road from Xinjiang to Tibet. And a map had shown the alignment of the road as running east of Aksai Chin. Now, the British themselves expressed surprise because it did not go through the typical passes in the mountains. And later, it was revealed that this road passed through Aksai Chin, which both Soviet Union and Britain regarded as part of India. So this is probably why the Russian map did not show the route passing through Aksai Chin. So China then used this road to occupy Aksai Chin and lay claim to it. And so, was it folly and disregard on India's part to actually ignore this development at that time?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I've explained to on that map that connect that where that arrow went is that where the road also went through Aksai Chin, and the accepted way to Aksai Chin was normally through the Karakoram Pass, right? And whereas these people made this road about 100 kilometers further to the east, and they got through, and they got through. That's how it is. The point is that for some reason we never even got to know that this road was being made till after it was made. And when once it was made and the Chinese started flying on it, it was a fait accompli. And this was as far back as mid 50s. So that's part of our, and like what he said, this whole border was considered as a frontier. There was no move in our part, in our thinking also to convert it into a border. And our thinking at that point of time was, look, this is part of Tibet, it's not part of China. So you never dealt with China with this as a border. And also probably it goes back to the point of the 1914 Shimla Agreement. The 1914 tripartite agreement in Shimla, which was between the British India, China, and Tibet, was to fix the border between Tibet and China. The border between India and Tibet was considered fixed. There's nothing to it. So we didn't have a issue with it. So that's where I think we misread the whole situation, and we are in the situation in which we are.
Thank you, Dilip. Back to you about your chapter again on Tibet and the United Nations. And despite the fact that the Chinese had invaded Tibet, India's main priority during this period, you say in your book, was to secure China's new seat in the for the communist regime in the UN. So that would mean displacing the nationalists who had taken refuge by this time in Taiwan. Was this a correct stance to take in the circumstances?
Well, with the benefit of hindsight, one can say that this was, as we used to say in college, blunder mistake. So this blunder mistake, see, in the early years in the UN, a lot of our emphasis was on trying to persuade the big powers to let People's Republic of China take the seat of the Republic of China. That was the big issue at that time. In fact, the Soviet Union had boycotted the Security Council for about 6 months because of that issue. Now, this is a little ironic for India because, on the one hand, India was opposed to power politics. India wanted to be a non-aligned country. And yet, India pursued the case of permanent membership for a country, the People's Republic of China, which may have been a large country, but wasn't a big power at that time. In fact, it was a country badly divided, extremely poor. And yet, India pursued the case of China and continued to pursue the case even after the 1962 invasion of India. In 1971, when the issue of the switch came and a resolution was tabled in the General Assembly, uh, Albania tabled the resolution, if you recall, that the seat of China should be given to the People's Republic and the Republic of China should be removed. India still voted for that resolution. This is after the Chinese invasion, after we have known that there was a dispute between our two countries. And at a time, again, in 1971, China was an extremely weak, poor country. And yet we pursued a permanent seat for China in 1971. And today, the worst opposition to our permanent seat campaign comes from China. So that shows that uh, this policy obviously was extremely misplaced. Thank you.
General Shankar, you've written a lot, moving away from the book, you've written a lot in your articles about Chinese attempts to open up the Indian market for trade by tactically presenting a situation of stability and calm on the borders. And you've also written about the Chinese shifting goalposts all the time on the border problem. The first time being in 1962 when they occupied Aksai Chin and other pockets along the McMahon line. So, for the benefit of this audience, can you elaborate very briefly on what happened in 1962?
See, 1962 was a clear case where they took off Aksai Chin, occupied a few places in, you know, along the McMahon line, Arunachal border. Then, of course, we all know there was a debacle in Sela. They came down up to, Bomdila. Walong also they came back. But by December of that year, they went back everywhere. They went back, barring Eastern Ladakh, where they held on to those places, which, otherwise they went back much beyond McMahon line. Places where they retained their thing was in Longju, which is near Ningchi, if you see, where in fact a little east of this dam which they're making now. Right. So that was then in 62. The goalposts had changed by then. Further, the next change in the goalpost happened in 1984 when they did the Sumdramchu incident and they incursed into Arunachal Pradesh. They shifted the goalpost further. The third change of goalpost happened in 2003. After 2003, when we recognized Tibet as part of China and Tibet recognized Sikkim as part of India, the third change started. They started laying claim on entire Arunachal Pradesh as South Tibet. The fourth stage of this change happened recently. First, they tried to change the goalpost in Doklam, and second, they tried to change the goalpost in Eastern Ladakh, right? Whereby they had wanted to push us back to the approximately to the 1956 claim line of what Chauvinla had put across. So this you see is the stage by stage. Call it salami slicing, yes. Call it whatever you want, shifting goalposts, what it is. But today our focus is on the restoration of status quo of anti of the LAC. Whereas we should be looking, at least in the near term, or rather even mid and the far term also, how do you restore your borders across Aksai and push them out of the other encroachments that no one talks of today? So to that extent, I think they have managed very adroitly to change the goalposts and have set the new goalposts, and we are shooting into those.
Dilip, in the epilogue to the book, I think the chapter was added after you'd already finished the book, and then you thought that this was important to add to it. Where you said there's actually you titled the chapter as No End in Sight. And you've talked about the impending controversy after the 14th Dalai Lama passes away, because then it's related to a rebirth, selection, or the growing up of the new Dalai Lama. China also, you say, is unlikely to recognize him and appoint its own person. So, how will this process play out in your view? And who will support the Chinese candidate? Who will oppose that Chinese candidate? And so, what should countries like India or USA, which is more interested in it now, what are they supposed to do in this situation?
Well, Anil, as you know, I added that bit after talking to you. It was your suggestion that I must give some context and some reference to the succession issue that is likely to come up. One hope it doesn't come up immediately, but then it will come up at some point in time. Now, get an idea of what may happen, one need only go back to 1995 when the 10th Panchen Lama, the Panchen Lama is the kind of number two Lama in Tibet. He belongs to the same school of Buddhism as the Dalai Lama and used to be a kind of a mentor to the minor Dalai Lama when he was a child. Now, the Dalai Lama and the Panchen Lama have always had an adversarial relationship. The 13th Dalai Lama, who had declared independence, uh, during his term, the Panchen Lama, I think it was 1926 or something, he had a quarrel with him and he went to China. And he died in China. And thereafter, his entourage selected the 10th Panchen Lama in China. And the 10th Panchen Lama did not go to Taiwan along with Chiang Kai shek. He stayed back. And like our ambassador, changed his allegiance or whatever to the new regime of the People's Republic. Now, this 10th Panchen Lama died he incidentally, although he supported the Chinese rule over Tibet, after Mao's death, he wrote some very uh, painful letters about the repression of of the Tibetans by the Chinese. So even he, although he was loyal to the regime, he at least expressed the anguish of the Tibetans. He died in 1995. His monastery in Shigatse, they selected a young kid as his successor, and they managed to send word across to the Dalai Lama in India asking for his blessings. And the Dalai Lama blessed the child, and they made the mistake of announcing it. The moment the announcement was made, the child and the family vanished in Shigatse, never to be heard of till now. And then the Chinese, after a short while, found the 10th Dalai Lama born to a couple in Lhasa. Both were members conveniently of the Communist Party. So that 11th Dalai Lama is currently the Lama. He roams around Tibet. He's more like a party functionary than a revered Lama. So we can expect a similar situation here where the Chinese will select somebody. I hope the Dalai Lama is not born in Tibet, because if he's incarnated in Tibet, then the poor kid will vanish as, like the Panchen Lama. It is likely, as the Dalai Lama has indicated, that he will be born in a free country. Incidentally, he has said that His Holiness has said that he completes 90th year in July this year, and he will give an indication of how he intends to see the succession issue. What is important here is that we also need to keep the succession issue separate from the Tibetan issue, because although the current Dalai Lama is a very revered Dalai Lama, but he has built the institution through his personal character. Institution of Dalai Lama has always been controversial, and the most difficult periods in Tibetan history have been whenever there was an interregnum between the two Dalai Lamas, it was always a very difficult period. So it's likely to be a difficult period even now. But fortunately, the current Dalai Lama has, realizing this, has already transferred all his political or temporal powers to the Central Tibetan administration. So he wants to avoid this hiatus that happens in the case of a transfer.
Thank you. So I could go on and ask both of you more questions, but I think we are running out of
Can I
time.
have a
Yeah,
thing on
please
succession?
add that. Then
Uh,
we'll open it up to
yeah,
the
I'll open it
audience.
up. 2 minutes. It's a very interesting thing which is going to happen. Uh, just think the Dalai Lama might nominate a person this side of the border as the next Dalai Lama, the current Dalai Lama. And like I said, the Chinese are already at it. They might nominate a Dalai Lama on the other side. We might have a situation in future where you're going to have two Dalai Lamas, and that will give rise to issues. Another thing, a macro issue which I want to put across to all of us is this. See, if you see the history of Tibet, whenever the central authority in China was weak, Tibet declared its autonomy or independence and had its own flag and constitution and everything. Whenever the Chinese authority was strong in Beijing, Tibet was part of thing, right? That's the ebb and vein the relationship between Tibet and China. The question we have to ask, and this is something which of my conviction, as time goes by, will China become stronger or weaker? Apparently, China is becoming stronger. But have a look at it. They're going through a terrible demographic decline, a terrible demographic decline, and their internal problems are increasing within the party. Their economy might not revive, despite all the propaganda that they're putting across. So, if the central authority in Beijing goes into a problem, and if you see the history of China itself, they've had a lot of issues, right? And the communist regime is finishing its 100 years, and soon it might start showing cracks. In which case, what does India do is a $1 million question which we all have to think of.
Well, of course, the economic survey which has come out is said that the Chinese will control 45% of the world's manufacturing very soon. And the optimism that there is in our own economic survey about China is something notable. But we'll open now for questions from the audience because I'm sure there are lots. I
ओके
see one hand up here.
लेट्स हैव वन वन बाय वन वहां से सबसे पहले हाथ खड़ा हो फिर हम सेंटर में आएंगे हाँ सर जस्ट वन बाय वन यस
Hello, good
क्विक
evening.
क्वेश्चंस एंड क्विक आंसर्स प्लीज
Yes, good evening, sir. Sir, just a question to you. As in Arunachal Pradesh looks a very strong part, like China considers Arunachal Pradesh has a very strong part as Brahmaputra glaciers and the Brahmaputra. The majority of the water that comes from Brahmaputra are the glaciers around Arunachal Pradesh. So, is it that the Chinese are interested in Arunachal Pradesh is due to the water that comes out of the glaciers, and the major source is coming from the Himalayas and that particular state?
ओके थैंक यू सो मच आंसर प्लीज माइक टू द जेंटलमैन देयर
Slide with the water. एक हमारा स्लाइड ऑन करना लास्ट में ना वो नदियां का है एक स्लाइड आप
स्लाइड में
कीजिए।
लास्ट वाली प्रेजेंटेशन में नदियों के बारे में डिटेल्स है वो लगाइए प्लीज
वो लगाइए
सर आप माइक थोड़ा सा पास कर लीजिए
या
प्लीज
I thought I knew this question will come up. You know, I'd made a nice slide on the rivers there. You know, everyone needs to understand this Brahmaputra.
There,
It's there.
up there.
Yeah, keep going forward. Next. Continue. Let's continue. You will get to it. Next. Yeah, continue. Yeah, keep going. Just keep going first.
नेक्स्ट
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, go back. Yeah, this. You have a look at this. If you see that black line is the, crest line of the Himalayas, and you see all the rivers which form the part of the Brahmaputra basin emanate from our side of the Himalayas. It's only the Tsangpo, the little channel which comes down. So to that extent, the Brahmaputra water uh, reduction is not much of a problem. The problem there is something else. Uh, so what water they're going to divert is only for the electricity development. And why are they developing this, taking this water out from there? And why are they developing that mega dam for electricity? Is they need water in the Yangtze basin. They have to do water transfer, and water transfer demands a lot of uplifting water. And for that, they need a tremendous amount of electricity. So it's going to be very difficult for the Chinese. So don't get taken up by it that they're going to do this dam by tomorrow. As of now, they don't even know where the dam is going to really come up, except that it's somewhere there. What is the plan for the dam? They've not put it out. So there's a long way away, right? There's panic as if the dam is going to come up tomorrow. This, by the time they took the Three Gorges Dam, it took them 2 decades plus. This is even more difficult. Yeah. I
The
hope
second
I
question.
answered that question of yours.
Thank you, Shankarji.
Yeah.
Second question. Quickly, please.
I am Colonel Tomar, criminologist. China attacked India.
Some mic pass rakhiye, please.
China attacked India because of Tibet. At the behest of America, we were supporting the freedom fighters of Tibet. So, is it because of Tibet that China attacked India? Please.
Well, to answer the second point that we were supporting the Tibetan freedom struggle, that is not entirely correct. The fact is that the CIA wanted to step in. In 1956, the CIA started its operation, but India refused the CIA permission to be based in India, which is why they chose Dhaka as their base in Pakistan. Incidentally, when the Chinese got to know about it, they protested not to Pakistan but to India. And of course, in 1959, the Dalai Lama and along with 80,000 Tibetans fled to India. We did give shelter to them, but we did not allow any political activity. The Dalai Lama wanted to be based in Kalimpong, incidentally. Kalimpong was the place where a lot of Tibetans used to stay when they used to come to India for trade or for other purposes. But he was removed all the way to Mussoorie and then finally to Dharamshala to be as far as possible from Kalimpong because we were genuinely concerned about not annoying China because of the shelter we had given. But for China, Tibet was extremely important. And the fact that the Tibetans had revolted against them, their entire claim that Tibet was a part of China fell through because people, they had claimed that they had come to liberate the Tibetans from I don't know whom. But when the Tibetans fled along with the regime, along with the Dalai Lama, then of course the bottom was taken out of their claim that they were actually liberating Tibet.
Thank you, Dilip ji. So I'm so sorry we can't have a discussion as of now. A question and answer. Next question from that side.
I
So
am from
sorry.
Sikkim, and I live in Sikkim. In Yatung also, we had business, and we were thrown out by the Chinese by giving a notice of 48 hours, and the government of India couldn't help us. My point is now, since the Chinese have come to Tibet, they also can come up to Uttar Pradesh because the Nepal there, the Chinese have very good influence and they are building infrastructures.
So
And
what's your
if
question?
that happens, if that happens, then China will come to Uttar Pradesh also. How we can stop it? How can we can force back China back to
Okay. Thank you so much,
from Tibet?
gentlemen.
Yeah, you got a very valid point. We have a issue with in Nepal. See, what the Chinese are doing is they've already got the friendship highway from Shigatse on down to Kathmandu, and now they're extending it down to the Terai region. One. Number two, Lumbini. The Lumbini Park is being made by China in Nepal, which is just across the border, and they, in fact, they're even trying to say that Buddhism is a Chinese religion. That's a different story. Uh, they also doing a lot of work to build a railway. It right now it's only in development stage or conceptual stage. It's not come to anywhere near even putting the first track. So all this is there, and the point is very valid that if tomorrow the Chinese start appearing in strength through Kathmandu down to the Tarai region, just think the Chinese are going to be over our heartland. Nepal sits on our heartland called Gangetic Plain. Okay, and it's a major threat. What did we have to buffer them out so far? We had a whole lot of Nepalese, Gorkhas, who served with us and who are still date getting pension from us. वो नमक खाते हैं हमारा. It is not only the pensioners in Nepal, it is their families and their extended families who were your loyal people. People talk a lot about Marxism in Nepal and all that. While that is so, a lot of these Marxists don't go against India because of this connection. Now we have put this under risk. We put this under risk by this Agniveer scheme. And the Nepalese government has withdrawn from this Agniveer scheme. So today, no more Gorkhas are coming into the Indian army. If Gorkhas don't come into the Indian army and don't go back as Indian army soldiers or don't get pension disbursement, as part of pension disbursement, our officers go out to all villages and disburse pension. And you come to know about everything what is happening in Nepal. That we are losing. That's a danger. The second point is the government of Nepal. You know, you have three parties. It's like a revolving chair. वो एक साल के लिए एक आता है केपी शर्मा ओली आ जाता है उसके बाद द्यूबा आ जाता है तीसरा वो प्रचंड आ जाता है एंड यू नो इट कीप्स गोइंग अराउंड सो विल वेट आउट ओली ओली चला जाएगा तो दूसरा आ जाएगा तीसरा दैट पार्ट आई एम नॉट टू बॉदर्ड but the thing which is of concern, which I think is a very valid concern, is we should have a good policy towards Nepal. And we should not consider this an isolation as a thing. Consider Nepal along with Bangladesh, what's happening in Bangladesh. Today, if there's a major security situation or aspect of a problem for us, it is Bangladesh. And like he said, Bangladesh के साथ हमारा सबसे बड़ा border है 4,000 plus kilometers. Now you think if you have a hostile Bangladesh and it promises to be hostile for quite some time now, and Nepal, which is not friendly, which is more China friendly, we have to really think out of the box. I don't have answers for this. The government of India has to really think, and I'm sure it's thinking. Yeah.
Thank you, Shankar ji. Any questions from that side? आगे एक हाथ खड़ा हुआ है.
Yeah, this is a very emotive question,
I'll
so I
come back.
don't mind answering.
I'll come back.
I mean,
Yes.
all of us.
जल्दी क्विक
Sorry,
क्विक
yeah.
माइक पहुंचा दीजिए वहां फिर हम यहाँ आएंगे. We'll take last two questions. Quickly, please.
Good afternoon, sir. Uh, Sir, since you both have served in the army as well as in the foreign service, does India have a leverage in terms of building a narrative in the future so that we can build a counter narrative in form of our legitimacy towards an independent Tibet and a peaceful neighborhood, counter narrative to the Chinese narrative?
Thank you.
You know, I don't think we should treat Tibet as a leverage. Tibet, as I said, is our friendliest neighbor historically. It's a people, it's a culture, it's a nation that's been there. It's been extremely friendly to us throughout history. So the issue is the rights of its people and the fact that the Tibetan people have not accepted Chinese rule. That is the most important indicator of the fact that they are under foreign occupation. And that is the cause that we have to continue to pursue uh, as much for our bilateral relations as for the fact that it is a neighbor in trouble. We gave shelter to the Dalai Lama, asylum to all these people because they were friendly neighbors. So that is what we need to continue to raise, be it simply human rights issues, be it the right of the people of Tibet for self determination. These are all factors that we have to continue to raise as a friendly neighbor.
I'll just add a word about narratives. You know, a lot of people these days, a lot of narratives are going around. You know, we talk Chinese narratives are great. Just think, what about our narratives? Are our politicians good enough to start narratives? Establishment doing the right thing. This is a paradox. When it comes to elections, our politicians are fierce narratives. एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के साथ घूमता है, एक 400 पार बोलता है. They kill each other with narratives. But when it comes to external playing, we have to really rethink. It's a very valid question, right?
Yeah.
And it's a concern which we have to really
Thank you.
understand.
Next question, please. The lady there.
Hello, sir. Good evening. I'm Shalini Rai. I'm a journalist. The author George Orwell has written Many books. Among them were 1984 and Animal Farm, which some would say was based on the Communist Party of China. Why do you think China has this need to be hegemonistic, to have world dominion? What drives it, in your opinion?
Shall I? Uh, this was a point that Prime Minister Nehru also made in Parliament around 1958-59. He said that whenever China has been united, it's been hegemonistic and it's moved towards empire building. If you actually look at China's history, you find that for long periods it's been ruled by foreigners. Of course, China calls all of them Chinese. The Mongols, the Manchus, these were not Han Chinese. They had their own language, they had their own culture, their own religion. And the largest empires in China have actually been by non Han Chinese. The Tang Empire, also in the 7th, 8th, 9th centuries, the Tang were also half Turkish and only half Han Chinese. The Mongols, Genghis Khan, he wasn't a Chinese. Kublai Khan wasn't a Chinese. Nor were the Manchus. And the largest empires were belonged to these people. Now, today, the Communist Party claims the entire Manchu Empire. The Manchu Empire was one of the largest empires China has ever had. But the Manchus conquered the parts that were of interest to them. The Manchus were neighbors of the Mongols north of China, and they had seen the Mongols build a huge empire. So when they conquered China, the first thing they did was to conquer the Mongol territories, so Mongolia, North East Turkestan. Then, as part of that, they took Tibet also, because from Tibet they wanted to throw out the Mongols, because the Mongols were very influential in Tibet. So for some reason, the current People's Republic, and of course, even before that, the Nationalist China also, just claimed the entire Manchu Empire. And that has been bane of China, that they feel that any territory once occupied by China, or not even occupied, but even if the ruler had at any time sent any kind of present, belonged to the Chinese empire. So that is the imperial mindset that continues to persist with them.
Thank you. One last question by the young man.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Vikramaditya Gupta. I have a question which, of course, might involve the genius minds of both people from the Ministry of Defense and External Affairs. One regarding how Tibet, as being an independent nation and a very strong civilization who invaded China at times, how its history has been forgotten, and how did the Chinese penetrate into Tibet? That's my first question. And number two,
I'm
being
so sorry. We're really running out of time. Just I can allow only one question.
okay, so
Thank
that's
you so
fine.
much.
Thank you.
Well, the first time the Chinese army actually appeared in Lhasa, Chinese meaning an army that was taking orders from a government in Beijing, was in 1720. These were the Manchus who had conquered China 100 years earlier, and they sent an army because there was a dispute in Lhasa between the Mongols, who were controlling the place, and the Tibetans had appealed to Manchus for help. That's the time they came. But these were Manchus, and the Manchus always appointed only Manchus as the Amban, or the local representative in Lhasa. The first time a Han Chinese actually appeared in Lhasa was only after 1906. And 1910, Chao Er-feng came to Lhasa, and he's called the Butcher of Tibet. So if you look at it, it's important for us to also read Chinese history the way it was, rather than the way the Chinese would like us to read it. And one of the things that I think is missing is our understanding of Tibet, because I don't think we study Tibetan history in our schools. So it is important, schools or colleges, it is important for us to start studying our neighborhood to understand how they have, how their history has evolved.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Let us congratulate them with a round of applause. Thank you so much, Shankar ji, Dilip ji, and Anil Wadhwa ji. मैं आमंत्रित करना चाहूंगा राघव चंद्र जी को, the director. Wadhwa ji, you have a quiz question, right?
No, I just wanted to thank
Hmm.
the two panelists today for their insights. For Dilip, especially for writing this very insightful book. Those of you who have a chance must read this because of the depth and the history in which he has gone into the subject of Tibet. Understanding Tibet would be very important. And thank you, General Shankar, for your insights on India-China relationship on the border. especially on the Brahmaputra. Many thanks.
Thank you so much. And let me tell you, we also have an author's book signing lounge right in front of the Antarang. तो आपको अपनी पसंदीदा किताब ऑथर के सिग्नेचर के साथ आप वहाँ पे कलेक्ट कर सकते हैं. For now, I would like to invite Mr. Raghav Chandra, the director of the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival, to please be on the stage and present the memento of BLF 2025 as a token of love and appreciation on behalf of the BLF. The painting that you see here is created by Padma Shri Bhuri Bai ji, who is a renowned Bhil artist. And this painting depicts the connection between the nature, earth, the human being, and the environment. And what an insightful discussion we have had. आई नो आप सभी के बहुत सारे सवाल बचे हुए हैं, बट हमारे गेस्ट यहीं पे हैं. बाहर रहेंगे तो आप उनके साथ बातचीत कर सकते हैं. प्लीज डोंट थिंक ऑफ मी एज अ बैड गाय. अगर मैं आपको मौका नहीं दे पाया, ये मेरी जिम्मेदारी है कि मैं अंतरंग में बाकी सेशंस का भी टाइम देखूं, ताकि बाकी ऑथर्स बाकी सेशंस जो हैं वो टाइम से हो सके, वो यहाँ पे आ सके. And I would like to hand over the podium to my co-anchor Parul, so we can move ahead with the next session.